For 10 years, Mark Bennett had believed that a good marriage was built on ordinary things. A steady job. A mortgage paid on time. Dinner at the same table. Two people who knew each other's routine so well that they could finish a sentence without thinking about it. From the outside, Mark and Laura looked happy. Their neighbors saw them leaving for work together on Sunday mornings. Friends noticed the photographs from vacations, the anniversary dinners, the Christmas presents. Nobody saw the silences that had begun appearing between them. Mark noticed. At first, it was something small. Laura started taking her phone everywhere. She carried it from the bedroom to the kitchen, from the kitchen to the bathroom, even when she was only walking across the house for a glass of water. Whenever a message arrived, her eyes moved toward the screen before her hand quickly turned it face down. Mark told himself it meant nothing. People needed privacy. People changed. And marriage, he reminded himself, was not supposed to mean watching every movement of the person you loved. But then came the late nights. Laura began arriving home 40 minutes later than usual, sometimes offering explanations that sounded rehearsed. Traffic was terrible. I stopped at the store. I needed some air. Mark never accused her. He listened. And every time, he noticed the same thing. She avoided his eyes. One Thursday evening, Mark prepared dinner himself. He opened a bottle of wine Laura liked, and put on the old playlist they had listened to during their first year together. When she walked through the door, he smiled. I thought we could have dinner like we used to. Laura glanced at the table. I'm tired, Mark. It'll take 20 minutes. I said I'm tired. Her voice wasn't loud. That somehow made it worse. Mark watched her disappear upstairs, leaving the untouched dinner behind. Later, he found her sitting on the edge of their bed, staring at her phone. He sat beside her. Are we okay? Laura's thumb stopped moving. What do you mean? You've been distant. She sighed. I'm just stressed. Then let me help. You can't. The answer came too quickly. Mark looked at her, waiting for something more. Nothing came. Over the weeks, he tried harder. He suggested a weekend away. Laura declined. He brought home flowers. She thanked him without smiling. He asked about her day. Her answers became shorter. Eventually, Mark stopped asking. That silence frightened him more than an argument would have. Then, one rainy Tuesday night, Laura fell asleep on the couch. Her phone lay beside her hand. Mark wasn't searching for anything. At least, that was what he would later tell himself. The screen suddenly lit up. A message appeared. I miss the way you talk to me when he's not around. Mark froze. Another message followed. You know you can tell me the truth. I won't judge you. There was no name on the notification, only a number. Mark stared at the screen until it went dark. He looked at Laura. She was still asleep. For the first time, suspicion became something heavier. Something real. Mark stood, walked away, and left the phone where he had found it. He did not wake her. He did not ask who had sent the messages. Instead, he went downstairs and stood alone in the dark kitchen, listening to the rain against the windows. The question that finally entered his mind was not whether Laura was hiding something. It was how long she had been hiding it, and whether the marriage he thought he knew had ever truly existed at all. The question stayed with Mark long after the rain stopped. How long? How long had Laura been living another life while sharing his? How many conversations had happened behind closed doors? How many lies had been spoken while he believed everything was normal? He carried it through the following morning, through his commute, through meetings he barely remembered attending. Every time his phone vibrated, he wondered whether Laura was messaging the same person whose words had appeared on her screen. By evening, Mark could no longer pretend. When he returned home, Laura was in the kitchen, preparing coffee. Her phone rested beside the sink. "Who is Daniel?" The question made her hand stop. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she looked at him. "What Daniel?" Mark felt something inside him go cold. "The man who misses talking to you." Laura's expression changed. "It isn't what you think." "Then tell me what it is." She reached for the phone, but Mark stopped her with a look. "Don't." Laura lowered her hand. "You went through my phone? I saw a message. You had no right." "Maybe not, but I saw it." The argument that followed had been waiting for months, perhaps years. Laura accused him of invading her privacy. Mark accused her of hiding behind privacy because she knew the truth would hurt him. Finally, her anger cracked. "Yes," she whispered. "There is someone." Mark stared at her. "Daniel?" She nodded. "How long?" Laura looked away. "Several months." The words landed harder than he expected. Mark sat down. "Are you sleeping with him?" Laura hesitated. That hesitation answered him. He closed his eyes. "Why?" Laura's voice became sharper. "Because I was lonely. You could have told me." "I did." "When?" "Every time I asked you to notice me. Every time I told you I felt like I was disappearing." Mark shook his head. "I was working. I was trying to build a life for us." "A life for you," she replied. "You were always building something. Paying bills. Fixing things. Planning the future. But you stopped seeing me." Mark looked at her as though she had become a stranger. "If you were unhappy, why didn't you leave?" Laura's eyes filled with tears. "Because leaving wasn't that simple." "Cheating was?" "No." She looked toward the window. "But Daniel made me feel different." Mark almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. "Different how?" "Wanted." The word hung between them. Laura told him Daniel listened to her. He remembered details Mark had forgotten. He complimented her, encouraged her, made her feel powerful instead of invisible. But Mark understood something Laura did not seem willing to admit. Daniel knew only the version of her she wanted him to see. He had never seen the bills, the arguments, the bad mornings, the responsibilities, or the years that turned romance into routine. He was living inside the fantasy. Mark was living inside the consequences. Laura finally said, "I'm thinking about leaving." Mark's face tightened. "Leaving me for him?" "I don't know." That uncertainty hurt more than a confession. Later that night, after Laura went upstairs, Mark remained alone in the living room. He thought about their wedding. Their first house. The photograph above the fireplace. Then he noticed something strange. A folder sat half hidden beneath a stack of papers. He opened it. Inside were apartment listings, travel documents, financial statements, and a handwritten list of things Laura needed to take with her. At the bottom was a note. New life. New city. New beginning. Mark slowly lowered the papers. She hadn't simply been thinking about leaving. She had been preparing to disappear. And suddenly, Daniel was no longer the only secret Mark needed to understand. She had been preparing to disappear. Mark could not sleep after finding the folder. Before dawn, he read everything again, hoping he had misunderstood. The apartment listings were real. So were the travel documents. Laura had even opened a separate account. But one thing bothered him most. A printed photograph of Daniel was tucked inside the folder. On the back, Laura had written a date 3 weeks away. Mark felt sick. He remembered the first message he had seen on her phone, the one that had seemed harmless. Now every word felt different. The secrecy, the late nights, the distant smiles, the plans, they formed a pattern he could no longer ignore. Yet none of it explained the weapon. None of it explained why Laura had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Mark looked at her, waiting for an explanation, but Laura seemed deeply terrified. When Laura came downstairs, she found him sitting at the kitchen table with a folder open. "Who is he taking you away from?" Mark asked. Laura stopped. "What are you doing with that? Was Daniel supposed to leave with you?" Her face tightened. "You went through my things again. You were planning a new life behind my back. I was planning to survive. Then tell me the truth. I already told you." "No. You told me what you wanted me to believe." Laura grabbed the folder. Mark held on. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Laura pulled it away and threw it across the room. "You want the truth?" she shouted. "I don't love you anymore." Mark stared at her. The sentence was devastating, but somehow it was not the worst thing he had heard. "Did Daniel know about the plan?" Laura said nothing. "Did he? He was going to help me." Mark's breathing became unsteady. "Help you leave?" "Yes. Or help you replace me." Laura stepped closer. "You're obsessed with him. You made him part of our marriage. You're trying to control me. I am trying to understand why my wife has been planning to disappear. Because you never listened. I listened tonight. No, you listened only because you were afraid of losing me." Mark shook his head. "I was afraid of losing the woman I thought you were." Laura's expression changed. For a moment, there was sadness. Then anger returned. "You don't get to make me the villain because I wanted something more. And you don't get to call betrayal freedom." The room fell silent. Laura walked toward the counter. Mark watched her carefully. "What are you doing?" "Nothing." She opened a drawer. Mark saw the weapon before he understood what was happening. "Laura!" She turned. The first shot shattered the silence. Mark stumbled backward. Then came another. And another. 6 shots tore through the room before everything became quiet. Mark collapsed beside the table. Laura stood motionless. The weapon remained in her hand. For several seconds, she simply stared at him. Mark tried to speak, but no words came. His eyes remained open. Laura dropped the weapon. "Oh God!" She backed away. "No!" Her voice broke. "No, no, no!" A neighbor heard the gunfire and rushed outside, calling emergency services. Within minutes, sirens filled the street. Paramedics entered the house and found Mark barely responsive. Laura stood against the wall, shaking. One paramedic shouted for equipment, while another began working to keep Mark alive. Laura watched, unable to move. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. No one answered. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Her words became a desperate repetition as Mark was carried toward the ambulance. "I didn't mean for this to happen." But as the doors closed and the sirens disappeared into the night, one question remained unanswered. Had Laura truly lost control? Or had every secret, every lie, and every hidden plan been leading toward this moment all along? The ambulance disappeared into the night, carrying Mark toward a hospital while Laura remained behind with the silence she had created. Mark survived. The doctors worked for hours. 6 bullets had torn through his body, but none had taken his life. When he finally opened his eyes, fluorescent lights blurred above him, and machines whispered beside the bed. He tried to move. Pain answered immediately. A nurse stepped closer. "Mr. Bennett, you're safe." Safe. The word felt almost insulting. Mark turned his head and remembered the kitchen. Laura's face. The gun. The sound. Then darkness. Rebecca Hale became a familiar presence during those first difficult days. She changed his bandages, checked his medication, and noticed what others missed. Mark rarely complained. He rarely spoke. But whenever Laura's name was mentioned, something changed in his expression. It was not fear. It was anger. Mark's recovery became a strange punishment. His body slowly improved, but sleep became dangerous. Whenever he closed his eyes, he heard the shots again. Sometimes he woke convinced Laura was standing beside the bed. Other times he woke reaching for a weapon that was not there. Rebecca noticed. "You're thinking about revenge," she said. Mark looked away. "I'm thinking about what she did. That isn't the same thing." "No," he answered quietly. "It might become the same thing." Rebecca had no easy response. "You need to rest," Rebecca told him one morning. "I need answers. Those can wait." "No," Mark whispered. "They can't." Detective Olivia Grant arrived that afternoon. She introduced herself quietly and explained that she was investigating the shooting. "Laura says you threatened her," Olivia said. Mark stared at the ceiling. "Did I? She says the argument became frightening. She believed you were going to hurt her." Mark closed his eyes. "That isn't what happened." "What do you remember?" He tried. "The drawer. Laura's hand. The first shot. Then fragments." He could not remember every word, every movement, or exactly how long the argument had lasted. Olivia noticed his hesitation. "Your memory may return gradually," she said. "Don't force it." Mark nodded. Later, Olivia questioned Laura. Laura described herself as terrified, insisting Mark had become controlling and unpredictable. But her account contained small contradictions. She claimed Mark had stood directly in front of her when she fired. Yet evidence suggested he had been several feet away. She said she fired once in panic. 6 rounds had been discharged. Olivia wrote everything down. Meanwhile, Daniel vanished. The moment he learned Mark had survived, he stopped answering Laura's calls. Messages went unanswered. His apartment was empty. Laura was suddenly alone. Mark learned about Daniel's disappearance from Detective Grant, and something inside him hardened. At first, he wanted justice. He wanted Laura arrested. He wanted the truth exposed. But as Olivia revealed more about the affair, the secret apartment plans, and Daniel's involvement, Mark's thoughts became darker. Justice began to feel too small. One evening, Olivia returned to the house and examined the kitchen again. There were photographs, records, and conversations suggesting Laura had planned her escape long before that night. Olivia placed the evidence beside her notes. 6 bullets. A hidden phone. A relationship. An escape plan. The pieces were slowly forming a picture, and Olivia feared Mark would see it. Because if he did, his anger might become impossible to contain. The damaged phone changed everything. It contained deleted messages from Laura. One message had been sent shortly before the shooting. "He knows. We can't let him stop us." Olivia stared at the screen. For the first time, she wondered whether Laura's version of the shooting was not merely incomplete. It might have been deliberately constructed. And if that was true, the shooting had never been an accident at all. The message on the damaged phone changed everything. For Laura, however, the discovery of those words was only the beginning of a much larger collapse. Within days, people who had once defended her began hearing the truth. Friends learned about Daniel. Some stopped answering her calls. Others confronted her directly, asking why she had lied about the marriage and the shooting. Laura insisted she had been trapped. She said Mark had become controlling. She said Daniel had understood her. She said the shooting had happened because she was terrified. But fewer people believed her now. Daniel believed her least of all. When Laura called him, he refused to answer. When she sent messages, he deleted them. He wanted no connection to the shooting. Laura became desperate to control the story. She contacted mutual friends, carefully choosing which details to reveal and which to hide. She portrayed herself as frightened, wounded, and abandoned. Detective Olivia Grant watched the pattern carefully. The messages told a different story. Laura had told Daniel that Mark was standing between them. She had told Mark that Daniel was only a friend. To each man, she had created a different version of reality. She had not simply been cheating. She had been manipulating both men. Meanwhile, Mark remained trapped inside the hospital. His body was healing, but his mind refused to rest. He repeatedly asked Rebecca questions every day. When can I walk normally? When can I leave? How long before I can go home? Rebecca answered patiently, but she understood that his real question was different. Why did Laura want him dead? Mark replayed the kitchen in his mind. He remembered the drawer, the weapon, Laura's expression, the first shot, then the others. But something remained missing. He could not understand why she had pulled the trigger 6 times. Rebecca eventually confronted him. You need to recover before you start solving the case. I need to know why she did it. You may never get an answer that makes sense. Mark looked at her. Then I'll find one. Olivia's investigation revealed another unsettling detail. Daniel and Laura had been fighting before the shooting. Their messages showed jealousy, threats, and arguments about Laura's plans to leave Mark. Daniel had begun questioning whether Laura actually intended to build a life with him. The affair was not the romance. It had already started falling apart. That discovery made Mark even more restless. Then one afternoon, Rebecca entered his room carrying a folder. She hesitated before speaking. Mark, there's something you should know. He looked up. Laura has been telling people she's afraid of you. Mark went still. She says you're going to come after her. The room seemed suddenly smaller. Mark stared toward the window. For weeks, he had thought only about surviving. Now, for the first time, someone had placed a new idea inside his mind. Revenge. And once the thought entered, Mark could not make it leave. That evening, Detective Grant visited him. I need you to understand something, she said. Whatever Laura tells people, you cannot threaten her. I haven't threatened anyone. I believe you. But she is building a story around fear. Mark studied her face. What story? That you survived, that you're angry, and that she has reason to be afraid. Mark gave a bitter smile. She should be afraid of prison. Maybe. But don't give her anything she can use against you. After Olivia left, Mark remained awake. He thought about Laura's accusation. He thought about the 6 shots. He thought about Daniel walking away while Laura was left to face everything alone. Most of all, he thought about how quickly Laura had turned the story around. She had shot him. Yet now she was telling everyone that she was afraid of him. Mark felt something inside him shift. It was not forgiveness. It was not even hatred anymore. It was something colder. He understood that Laura wanted him to look like the dangerous one. And for the first time since waking in the hospital, Mark wondered what would happen if he stopped caring about the story she was telling. Survival had not brought peace. It had given his anger time to grow. The hospital doors opened on a cold gray morning, and Mark Bennett walked outside for the first time since Laura had shot him. He was alive, but he did not feel free. Every step reminded him of what had been taken from him. His body remained weak, his movements careful, and pain followed him like a shadow. Yet the hardest part was knowing that the world had continued while he lay unconscious. Rebecca stood beside him before he left. Take it slowly, she said. Mark nodded. I will. But she knew he was already thinking about Laura. When Mark reached the house, he stood outside for several minutes before unlocking the door. Nothing had changed. The curtains were still hanging in the windows. Their wedding photograph remained above the fireplace. Laura's favorite cup sat inside the kitchen cabinet. Yet the house felt abandoned. Mark walked from room to room, touching objects that once carried ordinary memories. The dining table reminded him of birthdays. The hallway reminded him of arguments that had seemed insignificant at the time. Now every memory felt contaminated. He found himself sitting on the bedroom floor with a box of photographs. There were hundreds. Vacations. Anniversaries. Christmas mornings. Two people smiling at cameras, pretending the future was guaranteed. Mark turned each photograph slowly. He wanted to find the exact moment their marriage had become a lie. Instead, he found something worse. He could not remember when Laura had stopped looking genuinely happy. That uncertainty consumed him. For hours, he read old messages and examined photographs, searching for clues. Every discovery seemed to create another question. Eventually, Detective Olivia Grant arrived. She found Mark sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by papers. "You shouldn't be doing this alone," she said. "I need to know what happened. You need to let the investigation do its job." Mark looked at her. "And if the system doesn't give me what I need? It will. You sound certain." "I have to be." Grant sat across from him. "Laura will face the consequences if the evidence supports the charges. But you cannot take matters into your own hands." Mark remained silent. Grant studied him carefully. "I mean that, Mark. I understand." But understanding was not the same as accepting. After she left, Mark walked into the backyard. He imagined Laura standing there. He imagined her hearing the same sounds he had heard before the shooting. The fear. The confusion. The certainty that something terrible was about to happen. For one disturbing moment, he imagined giving the fear back to her. Then he looked away. Rebecca visited that evening. She immediately noticed something different. "You're angry." "I have reasons." "I know." Mark sat by the window. "She took my life from me. I'm just trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do with what's left." Rebecca sat beside him. "Surviving someone doesn't mean becoming them." Mark looked at her. "What if becoming someone else is the only way to stop hurting? Then you're letting Laura decide who you become." Her words stayed with him. That night, Mark barely slept. He knew he needed distance from Laura, yet every thought seemed to lead back to her. Near midnight, his phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number contained a single address: Laura's temporary apartment. Mark stared at it for a long time. He did not reply. He read the message again, wondering who had sent it and why. Whoever had given him the address knew where Laura was hiding, and they knew Mark would want to know. He did not tell Detective Grant. He knew meeting her could destroy everything. The wounded part of him wanted one thing: to stand across from Laura and ask why 6 bullets had not been enough to end the life she had taken away. He simply wrote the address down and placed the phone on the table. For the first time since leaving the hospital, Mark knew exactly where Laura was. And he knew something else. Soon, he was going to see her. The address remained folded inside Mark's pocket for 3 days. He did not go. Instead, he followed Detective Grant's instructions and stayed away from Laura while the investigation moved forward. For the first time, evidence seemed to be speaking louder than either of them. Grant discovered financial records proving Laura had been preparing to leave the marriage. Deleted messages revealed that she and Daniel had discussed Mark, the apartment, and a future together. More importantly, investigators found evidence contradicting Laura's claim that she had fired in immediate self-defense. The case against her was becoming stronger. When Grant told Mark, she expected to see relief. Instead, Mark simply stared at the floor. "They're going to believe you," Grant said. Mark nodded. "That should matter." "It does." But his voice lacked conviction. He had spent weeks imagining the moment when the truth would finally emerge. He thought justice would feel like peace. It didn't. It felt empty. That evening, Mark sat alone in the house, listening to the refrigerator hum in the kitchen. The walls still carried traces of the life he had shared with Laura, but none of it felt real anymore. Then his phone rang. Laura. Mark almost ignored it. He answered. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Laura whispered, "I'm sorry." Mark closed his eyes. "For shooting me?" "For everything." "You don't get to say everything." "I know." "No, you don't." Laura began crying. "I was unhappy, Mark. I felt trapped. I felt like you didn't see me anymore. You had an affair." "I know." "You planned to leave." "I know." "You shot me 6 times." Silence. Then Laura said something that made his stomach tighten. "You pushed me to that point." Mark opened his eyes. "What?" "I never wanted it to happen." "You're blaming me." "I'm saying things were broken long before that night." Mark's voice became quiet. "You still don't understand." "What?" "You're still trying to make me responsible for what you did." Laura cried harder. "I loved you once." Mark looked toward the wedding photograph above the fireplace. "Maybe I did. Then why did you destroy me?" She had no answer. Instead, she asked whether he still loved her. That question unsettled him more than anything else she had said, because Laura was still reaching for him. Even after the shooting. Even after the affair. Even after everything. She wanted forgiveness, sympathy, perhaps even permission to believe she was not entirely responsible. Mark suddenly understood. The affair had not been the only form of control. She still wanted control over the story inside his head. He ended the call without saying goodbye. The house became silent again. Mark placed the phone on the table and stared at it. He no longer imagined Laura standing trial. He no longer imagined a courtroom where strangers would finally understand what she had done. He imagined Laura alone. He imagined her discovering what fear felt like. He imagined her realizing that the man she had nearly killed had survived. Those thoughts frightened him. But they also brought a strange sense of calm. The next morning, Detective Grant called. Mark did not answer. She called again. Nothing. At the hospital, Rebecca received no response either. Mark's routine had changed completely. He stopped attending his rehabilitation sessions. He stopped answering friends. He stopped returning calls. And for the first time, Grant understood that surviving 6 bullets had not made Mark safer. It might have made him more dangerous than anyone realized to Laura. Grant drove to his house. The front door was locked. His car was gone. She looked at the empty driveway and felt a chill. The address Laura had been staying at suddenly came back to her mind. Grant immediately reached for her phone. If Mark had gone looking for Laura, the investigation was no longer simply about what happened in the past. It was about what might happen next. The warning in Olivia Grant's mind came too late. By the time she reached Mark's house, he was already gone. Mark had disappeared without telling anyone where he intended to go. To the outside world, however, he seemed to be doing exactly what a recovering man was supposed to do. He attended rehabilitation appointments. He took his medication. He answered polite questions from neighbors. He even smiled when people asked how he was feeling. "Getting better," he would say. Nobody saw what happened after dark. At night, Mark woke sweating as the memory of the kitchen returned. He could hear the first shot, then the second, then the others. Sometimes he dreamed Laura was standing over him. Sometimes he dreamed he was standing over her. He could not tell which frightened him more. During the day, he studied the address he had received. At night, he imagined the confrontation. He told himself he wanted answers. Then he told himself he wanted justice. But the word punishment began appearing in his thoughts more often. Mark knew the difference between those words. He simply no longer trusted himself to care. Meanwhile, Laura's world was collapsing. Daniel had stopped responding completely. The apartment she once imagined as the beginning of a new life now felt like a hiding place. Her friends avoided her. Some refused to answer messages. Others told her they needed distance. The investigation moved forward, and every new piece of evidence made Laura feel the walls closing around her. She watched television reports without sound, staring at images of police vehicles outside the house she had shared with Mark. Sometimes she heard herself described as a suspect, sometimes as a wife, sometimes as a woman who had survived a troubled marriage. None of the descriptions felt complete. Laura wanted people to understand she had been unhappy, but she was beginning to understand that unhappiness did not explain 6 bullets. One evening, she called Daniel again. The call went directly to voicemail. She left no message. She listened to the automated voice and hung up. Then she checked the locks. Front door, back door, windows. She checked them twice. Around midnight, Laura sat alone in the apartment with every light switched off except the small lamp beside the couch. Rain tapped against the glass. She stared at the locked front door. Then she heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Approaching. Laura stopped breathing. The footsteps came closer. She stood and stepped backward. Another step. Then another. Her hand covered her mouth as she listened. The footsteps stopped directly outside her door. Laura waited. Nothing happened. Then the sound moved away. She remained frozen for several seconds before slowly approaching the door. She looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. A moment later, someone appeared at the far end of the corridor. It was an elderly neighbor carrying a grocery bag. Laura exhaled shakily. It had not been Mark. But the fear remained. She returned to the couch, pulling her knees toward her chest. For the first time, Laura understood what she had created. She had spent weeks telling everyone that she was afraid Mark would come after her. Now she was genuinely afraid. Not because she knew he was outside. Because she knew he might be. Across town, Mark sat inside his parked car, staring at the same address. He did not approach the building. Not yet. He watched the windows, remembering the woman he had married and the person he had become after surviving her attack. His hand tightened around the steering wheel. He could choose to leave. He could call Olivia. He could still let the law finish what it had started. But Mark remained where he was. And somewhere behind one of those dark windows, Laura was beginning to understand that the man she had expected to remain a victim was no longer waiting to be saved. The footsteps had faded, but Laura could not shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Then 3 quiet knocks sounded against the door. She froze. Another knock. Laura! Her face drained of color. Mark. She stepped backward. How did you find me? Open the door. No. I didn't come here to hurt you. She almost laughed. You shot me 6 times, Mark said. You don't get to decide what I'm capable of anymore. Laura stared through the peephole. He was standing alone. She unlocked the door, but kept the chain in place. Mark looked thinner than she remembered. The hospital had changed him. His face carried exhaustion, and his movements were careful. I just want to talk, he said. Laura slowly closed her eyes. You shouldn't be here. I know. You're supposed to stay away from me. I tried. Then leave. Mark looked at her. You really believe you're the victim? Laura's eyes hardened. I was terrified. You were planning to leave me. I was unhappy. You had Daniel. That wasn't enough. You lied to me. Yes. You cheated. Yes. You shot me. Laura looked away. I panicked. No, Mark said. You made a choice. Her voice trembled. You don't know what it felt like living with you. Then you should have left. I tried. You were preparing another life behind my back. Because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of staying. Mark stared at her. For 10 years, I thought we were building something. We were. Then why did you destroy it? Laura's eyes filled with tears. Because I felt invisible. Mark swallowed. You could have told me. I did. You told me you were tired. You told me you needed space. You never told me you were replacing me. I wasn't replacing you. Daniel was going to leave with you. Laura said nothing. Mark continued. You told everyone I was controlling. You told them you were afraid I would come after you. You are here. I came for the truth. Laura shook her head. No. You came because you want me to suffer. Mark did not answer. She stepped closer to the doorway. You survived. You got what you wanted. Did I? Yes. Look at me. Laura did. The 6 bullets didn't kill me, Mark said. But they killed the person I used to be. Laura began crying. I am sorry. Mark's expression remained empty. You're not. I am. You're sorry because you're afraid of what happens next. That isn't fair. Neither was waking up in that hospital. Laura wiped her face. I loved you once. And I loved you. Then forgive me. Mark looked at her for a long moment. That is what you still don't understand. What? I didn't come here for an apology. Silence filled the doorway. Laura suddenly understood. Her expression changed. Mark? He stepped forward. She backed away. Please. He stopped. For one final second, Mark remembered their wedding day, the first house, the photographs, and the woman he believed Laura had been. Then he made a decision he could never undo. The violence that followed was brief. Laura died. Mark remained standing in the apartment, listening to the silence afterward. There was no relief. No victory. No feeling that justice had finally arrived. Only the terrible realization that he had crossed the same boundary he once believed separated him from Laura. He looked at the woman he had once loved and understood that nothing had been restored. His marriage was still gone. His future was still broken. And the person he had become could never return. Mark walked toward the door. He didn't look back, because he knew there was nothing left. Behind him was the end of everything. Ahead was the consequence. As he stepped into the hallway, he knew the truth at last. Surviving Laura had given him another chance at life. Killing her had taken that chance away. The hallway was silent when Detective Olivia Grant arrived. She had been trying to reach Mark for hours. When the call finally came from Laura's building, she already knew what she was going to find. The apartment door stood open. Inside, Laura was dead. There was no mystery about who had come to see her. Mark's presence had been captured by a security camera in the building. His car had been seen outside. A neighbor had heard voices before the apartment became silent. Grant closed her eyes briefly. She had warned him. Now the investigation she had spent weeks building had changed completely. At first, the case looked simple. A husband survives an attempted murder, leaves the hospital, confronts the woman who shot him, and kills her. Revenge. But Grant refused to stop there. She ordered the apartment secured and began reviewing everything again. The 6-shot attack against Mark was confirmed through medical records, forensic evidence, and Laura's own statements. The affair with Daniel was confirmed through messages, photographs, financial records, and testimony. Then came the evidence of Laura's manipulation. She had lied to Mark. She had lied to Daniel. She had lied to friends. She had tried to shape the story around herself until everyone else appeared responsible for the choices she had made. But none of that changed what Mark had done. He had not accidentally killed Laura. He had gone to her apartment knowing exactly where she was. He had confronted her. And after the confrontation, He had made a deliberate decision. Grant found Mark several hours later. He did not run. He sat alone in his car, staring through the windshield. When Grant approached, he lowered the window. "It's over," she said. Mark nodded. "I know." "Where is Laura?" "You already know." Grant studied him. "Did you kill her?" Mark looked down at his hands. "Yes." The answer was quiet. There was no attempt to escape responsibility. "No self-defense?" Grant asked. "No." "Did she attack you?" "No." "Did you believe you were in immediate danger?" Mark shook his head. Grant waited. "Then tell me why." Mark looked toward the dark street. "She almost killed me. I survived. Then I became the person who finished what she started." Grant felt the weight of those words. She had spent months watching Mark transform from a wounded husband into a man consumed by betrayal. She understood why he was angry. She understood why Laura's actions had destroyed him. But understanding was not forgiveness. Mark had been a victim. He was also responsible for what happened next. The case could not be reduced to good and evil. Laura had committed a terrible crime. Mark had committed another. Neither truth erased the other. At the station, Mark gave a full statement. He described the argument without minimizing his anger or Laura's betrayal. Grant noticed that he never once called himself a hero. He called himself a man who had lost control of the future he once imagined. That distinction mattered. It did not make him innocent. It simply made the truth harder to ignore. And that was precisely why Grant believed his confession might finally matter in court. Grant placed the handcuffs around his wrists. Mark did not resist. As they walked toward the police car, he looked back once. There was nothing in his expression except exhaustion. For months, he had believed the truth would set him free. Now he understood something far more painful. Truth could explain everything. It could expose the affair. It could prove the shooting. It could reveal the manipulation. It could explain the revenge. But truth could not undo murder. And as the car pulled away, Grant knew the final chapter of the case would not be about who was right. It would be about what justice demanded from a man who had once survived 6 bullets, and then chose to cross the line himself. The courtroom doors closed behind Mark, but the case remained with everyone who had touched it. He faced the consequences of killing Laura without excuses. The evidence had established everything: the affair, the hidden plans, the 6 shots that nearly ended his life, and the deliberate choice he made afterward. Detective Olivia Grant testified about the investigation. She described Laura's lies, Daniel's involvement, and the evidence that had changed the case from a shooting into something far more complicated. Daniel never returned to Laura's world. He disappeared from the story almost as quickly as he had entered it, leaving behind messages, photographs, and a relationship that had promised escape but delivered destruction. Grant remembered the beginning. A marriage had been damaged by secrecy. Betrayal had become anger. Anger had become violence. Then violence had created revenge. 2 people had been destroyed. One was dead. The other would spend years living with what he had done. Before Mark was taken away, Rebecca visited him one final time. She sat across from him in silence before speaking. "You don't have to forget what happened." Mark looked at her. "I wish I could." "You don't have to forgive her either." He lowered his eyes. "Then what am I supposed to do? Remember who you were before all of this." Mark smiled. "I don't know if that person is still there." Rebecca answered gently. "He is. You just have to stop punishing yourself long enough to find him." Mark carried those words with him. Years passed. The case became an old story to everyone except him. People moved on. The headlines disappeared. The photographs faded. The apartment changed owners. Mark's life became quieter. He often wondered what might have happened if he had walked away from Laura that night. If he had allowed the courts to decide her fate. If he had chosen survival instead of revenge. There were no answers. Only consequences. Laura's betrayal had taken his marriage. Her bullets had nearly taken his life. His revenge had taken away whatever remained of his future. One evening, years later, Mark sat beside a window as darkness covered the sky. A wedding photograph rested on the table. He picked it up. For a moment, he remembered the man in the picture. That man had believed love could survive anything. Mark no longer knew whether that belief had been foolish or beautiful. He turned the photograph face down. Not because he had forgiven Laura. Not because the past no longer hurt. He turned it over because he understood something he had spent years refusing to accept. Revenge had not given him his life back. It had only taken another piece of it. Outside, evening settled over the street. Mark remained by the window, alone with his memories. He had survived 6 bullets. But survival, he finally understood, was never the same thing as being free.